I'll give a quick intro to myself before passing off to Kevin, who'll lead the first part. I'm one of the maintainers of Fluent Bit. I'm currently a field architect at Chronosphere, and within Fluent Bit, really look after some of the larger architecture, blogs, docs, project management aspects of it. Very excited to go through this today. Kevin? Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Anurag. My name is Kevin Fallis, principal with AWS and I work with the OpenSearch service. And today we're going to talk a bit about security analytics and how FluentBit falls in line with delivering logs to the security analytics plugin. And apologize noise in background. I have some contractors in the house, so if you hear the beeping, it's just a fire alarm going off. So don't be too concerned. That's why I muted out earlier. But let's dig in. Let's go into our agenda here. So first of all, we've done our introduction. Let me tell you a little bit about security analytics. So a while back, many customers had expressed to the OpenSearch project, and keep in mind that the OpenSearch project is where we do all our innovation. We work with customers. We work with people such as yourself that are innovators and contributors to really make a better search solution. And this is all underneath the Apache 2.0 license. I should note, the Linux Foundation is now adopting and is going to be fostering the OpenSearch project. Now, nothing changes from the AWS perspective and your perspective. It just means that we have a bigger team of people to help foster the innovation, just like Anurag and his team have partnered with Chronosphere or have been are with Chronosphere now to help Calyptia and the project Fluent Bit make it to the next level. So all these announcements which have happened over the past, I'd say year, are very, very good for the open source community. So on the boundaries of security analytics, what it really is a tool that helps you identify threats. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the plugin does, but effectively you can think of it as the detection part of a SIEM, which is a security information and event management system. And within this, what we have is a framework by which we build on top of Sigma rules, and we also build on top of the MITRE attack framework. And so what this enables you to do is to be able to build a configuration that scours your logs, and in this case, logs coming from the client-side collector, FluentBit, and delivered to Data Prepper, which in today's session we'll use some AWS stuff. Apologies, I wasn't able to get all of my container stuff ready for the lab or for the discussion, but it's going to deliver to a managed data prepper, and that's going to deliver to a managed OpenSearch offering, which is the same open source stuff that you can have a chance to play with by downloading the bits and whatnot. And then we're going to walk through then how you configure that entire pipeline. So we're going to talk about how you collect these security events from Windows machines. Like many people probably don't use a lot of the FluentBit stuff on Windows, and some people might be used to some of the prior agents that run out there. But in the end, FluentBit for Windows does a really, really good job of collecting multiple type of things, such as security logs, event logs, and other things, and we'll dig a little bit more into that. But it really prepares things so it can be ingested into OpenSearch. Now, then we're going to talk about how do you pair FluentBit with OpenSearch and security analytics. So we'll walk through that entire pipeline. We'll show you configurations to get you set up. There'll be a little bit of AWS details in there, but these are all configuration parameters that you find in FluentBit. And then we're going to go ahead and view it. Like when you look at our plugin for the security analytics, there's actually already a good set of pre-canned dashboards and visualizations, but also integrations with alerting and monitoring. So you can actually look at your events that are happening and also get informed programmatically as to what's occurring in your environment. And finally, as usual, Anurag and myself will take any questions that we have towards the end of this. But let's go ahead and dig in. So let's look at FluentBit in the OpenSearch project. So actually, I'm going to turn this one over to you to Anurag, so you can talk about your product, and then I'll lean in on my stuff next.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. So as Kevin mentioned, right, Fluent Bit, open source, Apache 2, part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So very community driven, and really based on plugins. How can we collect a bunch of data, do some sort of small filters, transforms, extensible processing, and then route it to many destinations. So in this case, we could do OpenSearch, we could do Amazon S3, maybe some block storage, maybe some files, some other open source projects. You have a lot of extensibility with where you're collecting, what you're collecting, and where you're routing to. Now, one of the big advantages when we think about FluentBit in terms of security really comes down to four big feature sets. And when we think about security, right, there's a lot of logs that need to be reliably collected. If we think about security logs, those definitely can be things like, hey, this is an intruder, this person has logged in, this is an audit event. And if we, for some reason, have a skipped event, we miss it, we're not reliably routing that, we can have blind spots. And that's really a piece where you need something that can reliably collect. It stores state of where it last collected from so it can then go resume, it can pause, it can restart, and it has some level of redundancy. And of course, with routing, you want something where if you can't connect to, say, OpenSearch, which is going to run all the detections, it's going to be able to retry. It's going to be able to configure that, not necessarily overwhelm any of the servers. It has that back off capability. Of course, with security logging events, you have a variety of sources. So the nature and the vendor agnosticism, if you will, of FluentBit is really useful. You have flat files, you have audit logs, you have different OSs. That could be Windows events, it could be Mac OS system logs, it could be Linux audit logs, Linux syslog. And that becomes a very, very important. And last but not least, just to wrap it up of, hey, Fluent Bit and what is it? Why is it important for security logging? It's really that lightweight nature. And if you think about your security solutions, you might have an EDR, XDR on top of your devices, and you want that to be really lightweight. You don't want that to interfere with the main applications that people are doing on their day-to-day. Same thing with your MDM, same thing with any of your other security applications. And the same is true really of your security logging product. You want that to be flying under the radar, not consuming a ton of CPU, ton of memory, something that just is reliably collecting those logs and events and routing it to a place where you can do those detections and whatnot. So FluentBit is really great for that. And again, just by virtue of how many times it's been deployed there. Cool.
Awesome. Well, let me talk a little bit about the Open Search project. And, the one thing that Anurag pointed out is that you have a multi uh, operating system vendor agnostic agent. And this is one of the things that, the Open Search project and other projects rely on is to have that open source, highly scalable, very, very lightweight agent to feed logs to destinations. So one of these destinations, and I think you saw the slide there earlier, you have a broad variety of sources that you can send to. And in many cases, some architectures will commingle different destinations for different purposes. In this case, we're going to talk a bit about OpenSearch. So OpenSearch again, is a community-driven project. Recently, we did, announce the Linux Foundation, but it is an Apache 2.0 licensed product. It is a fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana. So when we look at this, we have OpenSearch dashboards and we have OpenSearch, which we now continue to innovate and provide plugins and other features essentially free of charge. So there's really going to be, other than the Apache 2.0 licensing, which there's no charge to it, that license doesn't prohibit you from basically deploying OpenSearch anywhere or even running your own managed services, which many of the partners in the AWS community do, such as Logs.io and other customers or other partners. So again, it is fully deployable to do what you want to for your needs for your business or for your own personal use or even for your college projects. And hopefully some people are on that are just learning about OpenSearch and Fluent Bit, and this lab is or this demo that I'm going to show you a little bit later on shows how you can set this up. Now, when we look at the product suite that's out here, we have the OpenSearch engine, we have what are called OpenSearch dashboards, which is a visualization aspect, and we also have Data Prepper. Now, what Data Prepper gives you the ability to do, just like Fluent Bit, it is a server-side collector, and that server-side collector gives you the capability to do transformations and other things that maybe you don't want to push off on the edge. And when we talk about the edge, we talk about if I can use all the compute on my containers or my EC2 instances or whatever other cloud providers I use it on, I can do a lot of my processing at the edge, and I can worry about routing and final filtering on a server-side collector. So Data Prepper is a server-side collector. It has a lot of capabilities. Now, when you look at Fluentd, Fluent Bit, there are a lot more output plugins. And when we look at Data Prepper, it's aligned with the OpenSearch project. But it is very, very flexible and scalable. We actually deploy this as a managed service, and that'll be part of my demo today, and show you that we can achieve a very, very high scale with a fairly lightweight solution on Data Prepper, just like you would see with FluentBit. So in the end, with OpenSearch, there are a rich variety of plugins, and one of those is a security analytics plugin. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a demo. So how does the dashboards provide value? Now, when we look at capturing events from Fluent Bit and we move those through the pipeline, OpenSearch Dashboards is your analytic tool. Now, most of you that are on the call today are probably familiar with it. For people that aren't on or familiar with this, what it gives you the ability to do is to make sense of your data. Now, log data in itself has variant formats, and you need to put those into different fields. With FluentBit and Data Prepper, you're able to parse things, augment data, redact data, or even transform data in the pipeline that you create. And so in the end, you need to be able to look at various fields that provide signals. And sometimes you want to look at trends. Sometimes you want to look at other details. And in our demo, we'll look a bit at how you do this. But overall, you are going to query these, basically these fields through APIs that are on OpenSearch, and you're going to basically reflect those into OpenSearch dashboards. So in this case, on the right-hand side, we see a source record, but we also see a visualization that takes that source detail and paints basically pretty pictures for you. So in the end, let's talk about a little bit, and I'll hand this over to Anurag again. Why do we put Fluent Bit with OpenSearch?
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. And so really the key points here is Fluent Bit is a client collector, right? And we think if you look at like that last slide where Kevin was showing, hey, how does the data flowing for like those AWS VPC flow logs? We're not going to be able to tell you those at any sort of aggregate level from an agent or a client. So pairing these two things together, the collector, something lightweight, runs relatively well, can get data into formats that can be used is really great for that visualization, that search, that analytics layer. Think of, for example, if I want to do an audit of what happened maybe 5, 6 months ago, right? Having the capability to do that search is really, really key. Now, from things like the data prepper side, where we have the server-side collection, that can be really powerful when you're doing some maybe stream processing across large swaths of time windows. Remember, why is FluentBit important for security, or why is it great? Because it's lightweight. Trying to do those large time scale collection, stream processing type actions at the very edge can be very expensive from a memory and CPU perspective if we have high volumes of data, which security tends to be. And then, of course, with the ingest, the APIs, the dashboarding, really these four tools together is really a foundation for observability, for security, for a lot of the data and services that you have. So very excited to kind of walk through how do you actually connect the dots and go from there.
Awesome. So, and the little pretty picture is just built out right now. But in the end, we're going to take that log data that you have that's being collected at the edge. And of course, these are Linux logs here. Again, Fluent Bit does serve Linux and Windows. It's a vendor agnostic and in many cases an operating system agnostic thing. We take that, collect it, transform it, and we present it as a visualization in OpenSearch dashboards. So let's put it all together. Now, when we look at this, this is a high-level detailed architecture diagram. FluentBit captures many sources. We have OpenTelemetry, we have other sources that you can capture from different vendors. And if you look inside of the open source project for FluentBit and even Fluentd, you'll find there's many contributors, many different companies that put their own spin in there. And the intent here is that you have these broad range of collectors. They could be database sources, they could be file system, they could be SMTP, and when you're hitting like a UDP port or things like that. The idea is that you collect that and you bring it in through FluentBit. And in many cases, we can also partner this with Data Prepper. And the combination of FluentBit and Data Prepper both can write to OpenSearch, but in many cases we have FluentBit writing to Data Prepper, or in this case, OpenSearch ingestion when we do the demo, and the Amazon OpenSearch service, and then we see the OpenSearch dashboards. Again, all open source. In this case, we're doing this as a managed offering, and FluentBit is a valuable part of being able to collect those logs. So enough talk. Let's get into a demo. What do you think, Anurag?
Yeah, yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I'm
All
excited
right.
to see.
So let me just pop on over here and get into my uh, basically. So just give you some background. I have a lab here that we've been working on to in the future. We will share it, but it's something that's a work in progress. And what we do is we install FluentBit on a multitude of Windows servers. In this case, today I'm just going to talk about a simple SQL server. I mean, sorry, a Windows server environment where I'm logging in and I'm able to set up FluentBit as a client-side collector, and I deliver it to OpenSearch. And my intent here is that these logs, which are security logs, are going to be delivered through OpenSearch ingestion. And we do a little bit more formatting, not too much. It's basically a pass-through processor, so I won't show that configuration. But what happens is it makes it downstream. Now, why do we throw Data Prepper in when you could easily just use FluentBit to OpenSearch? Well, the thing is that at scale, and many of the customers that I deal with are at super scale. We're talking terabytes, in some cases over a week's time period, petabytes of data. You can't do you can't use individual collectors like or client-side collectors, say 10,000, 20,000, or even have customers that have 40,000 plus you know, instances or containers that are running in their pods deliver en masse with any scalability to OpenSearch because of the number of connections and the velocity of data that comes in. So what's valuable about having Data Prepper slash OpenSearch ingestion in the mix is that we can put a buffer in there, and we actually have persistent buffering capability on the process. And as your fleet expands and contracts, and as the volume of data comes in, you have to have some intermediary behind. If you build this yourself, you have an auto-scaling group, you might have an F5 load balancer, multiple destinations. If you use an AWS, you have course, load balancers and target groups. But in the end, you want to spread that load across a server-side collector fleet, and you need a buffer in between. Without that buffer, again, as Anurag pointed out, you lose events if you don't configure it properly. And so the reason why we use it in this scenario is to make sure that we capture the events, we persist them into some persistent buffer, and then if our OpenSearch configuration can't scale as fast as the logs that are coming in, we have an area where we can expand and contract and keep that data so that it doesn't drop to the floor. So um, now when we
And real
look at,
quick, Kevin,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I saw a question come in too. You said the previous slide showed FluentBit and Data Prepper together. Would that mean FluentBit can do similar data extractions as Data Prepper? And to answer that too, yes, you could do quite a bit of processing on the Fluent Bit side. And as Kevin has mentioned, right, when we think of that persistent layer, yes, we can do regex extractions, enrichments, removals, reductions at the agent level. But then when we fire that data over to OpenSearch, we could have this layer that lives as kind of a persistent aspect, maybe doing some more like the SQL stream processing or SQL stream queries on top.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a very, very good point. Um, Now, when you start looking at how you set up the environment, Windows logs um, have a different format. And in the end, there might be some parsing that you want to take care of. For example, there are certain logs on Windows that are actually in a UTF-16 format. And Fluentd actually sometimes is used to handle that sort of parsing mechanism for that particular codec. Um, but in the end, when we look at collecting Fluent Bit on a Windows box, you essentially download this package from the open source project itself, and you install it. I'm not going to go into the details of that because we don't have a lot of time to talk about how do I configure and set this all up in here. But let's talk about the Fluent Bit configuration. Now, what we have right now here is very, very simple, high-level stuff. First of all, there's a couple different sections inside of Fluent Bit, multiple sections actually. For the purposes of this particular demo, I first of all have a log level of debug. And I will tell you that having this helps solve a lot of problems, regardless of the cloud provider or any of the other things that you, or any of the other deployments you have, if you're on-prem or if you've been using your local laptop. Sometimes when you set everything up and you think it's going to work and you think everything is just perfect, guess what? Something will bite you. One of these days, find me somewhere if you're out at reInvent or hanging out with Anurag at, one of the open source community things or, KubeCon or whatnot. Ask me about challenges that I had with setting this stuff up. But in the end, the debug statement is helpful because it tells us all the things that are happening, handshakes, errors that you're getting that normally you wouldn't see. And I usually set this to debug. I would take this out in a production environment, but next section is the input. Now with Windows, there are multiple different security logs. And if we go in here, there is something called the event viewer. And inside of Windows, it actually allows you or enables you, not allows you, it enables you to look at logs that are of a security concern. And so all of this feeds into our security analytics plugin. But you can see that with Windows logs, you have things like keywords, date and time, the source where it came from, an event ID, and a task category. If we go a little bit more into the log itself, there's plenty of details that you can navigate through and you can look at. And all of these fields, you need to be able to extract them. And this is where Fluent Bit comes in and actually where Data Prepper comes in. If you want to do special mutations with the data, you can take this what basically is free-form data, and you can convert it and pick specific fields. Now, for the purpose of our demo today, we won't talk about how you get super detail into transformations and whatnot. And maybe that's another thing we talk about on our next webinar, Anurag. But you can see that we have a login, special login. We also have a couple other things in here that are telling us what's happening with the security logs themselves. And in the case of what I'm going to demo is I'm going to look for someone who's trying to hack into my system. And the first place everybody starts is you have a vector of attack. Now, what I have right now is a very, very confined security group on AWS that only enables me to talk to the endpoint for an RDP session. Now, in the end, if I had this publicly exposed and I didn't realize it, I want to capture that event to see if there's someone trying to brute force attack my system. And so this is a very, very simple use case, but it's a very, very important use case. So as we look at this, all of these have specific event IDs. And so when you log in, it's 4648. When you have a special logon, which is 4672, it has a different event ID. In the end, these event IDs are what we're going to trigger off when we get into the details of the configuration for security analytics. So now we have an overview of where the logs are at. Let's go ahead and take a look at the output section. So right now I'm grabbing I'm giving it a name, which is called WinLog, and I'm grabbing a channel, which is security. This basically maps to this particular event category, for lack of better terms. So I could actually look at application logs if you run an IIS. I can look at system logs if I want to understand what's going on behind the scenes for other activities. But we have application security set up, system, and forward events. Today we're going to talk about security. So all I'm doing is listening on this channel. Now you could put a comma-separated series of values to listen on all these channels. But in the end, the configuration is different for each log type. And so my preference is, and people can argue this, is to focus on one log type as a collector, or if I do send it downstream to my server-side collector, I have the ability to parse those events in with different pipelines to handle the different various structures. But we'll keep it simple, we'll keep it security. Now the interval is basically how often I'm pulling this information off. Now we have an output section. In the output section, I give it a name, which is HTTP. I'm matching all of the events that come in. You could be very, very specific and say, just match WinLog in this section. Now I give a host. This host can be any DNS name or IP address that you have. In this case, I'm going to have this go to a OpenSearch ingestion pipeline, which is managed data prepper on the AWS side. Now I have a port that I can configure in there, and there's a listening endpoint that happens on the data prepper side, and I'm going to call it WinSecLog ingest. We want a JSON format. So one of the beautiful things that happens at the edge with Fluent Bit is the ability to take a raw format or a not prepared format and transform it. Great thing is that it will automatically detect and pick up and put this into a JSON format if you say format JSON. Now, there's other things you could do for, adjusting and modifying this data, but in the end, having that format in there prepares it for data prepper, because data prepper expects a key value pair across its APIs on the HTTP side of the house. And so we need Fluent Bit to prepare it into a JSON document so we can further slice and dice it as we get into the data prepper side of the house. Now, one of the things on AWS is that you have some authentication. Everything's zero trust on AWS, unless you configure it to talk to things, which was one of the challenges I found the other day. You need to ensure that you have the proper credentials to talk to an endpoint. Now, AWS Auth isn't just the only thing you can use. You can also use basic auth or other authentication mechanisms. You can use TLS, and you can bring your own certs and whatnot. But in the end, for this demo, we're going to use AWS and the OpenSearch ingestion service. Now, one of the nice things that the Chronosphere team built back in the Calyptia days was the ability to specify an AWS service for OpenSearch ingestion, which again is data prepper. Now, there are a couple little tags in here. We actually support serverless too, which might be another talk in the future. But in the end, there's a wide variety of configuration parameters that you put in here to enable the logs to be delivered to their destination. In the end, I do keep a log level debug on here, even though I have the log level set up here, and I think it's redundant, isn't it, Anurag? I probably can remove that
Yes,
section.
you
So,
can.
a little bit of playing, as you can see, that we did a little bit earlier. But the requirement is that we do have an encrypted payload going across the wire, which is why we turn TLS on. And we're using the open search ingestion certs on this case. We're just making sure that we talk TLS. It'll grab all the information, do the handshaking. But in the end, I have a role, and this role will disappear after this call. So if you think you're going to hack it, you're not going to be able to. But in the end, yeah, I've got it isolated. But all I have to do is provide a role which then enables my Windows to talk to OpenSearch ingestion in an AWS environment. So now we've seen the config. Let's go ahead and
And
set it.
one thing maybe to highlight too for folks who might be thinking about OpenSearch and how to route to it, you can also add multiple outputs as well. So one common use case is you might be collecting logs once and you're routing it to your existing SIM and you want to try out OpenSearch, you want to try out all the cool stuff that Kevin's about to show you. You just add another output section. So just like Kevin had output HTTP, we could add another output for syslog if you're going to maybe a legacy SIM, maybe some next gen SIM, whatever it may be that you might be migrating from or thinking about dual routing that data from. Exactly, yeah. What Kevin
Yeah,
said.
you could like a standard out type of section here and whatnot. Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely. Yeah, and that's a key thing to keep in mind too. Especially if you're looking at OpenSearch or you're looking at another service to move your log collection to. Many customers do a dual write scenario to evaluate the feature set of X and Y. And, it's awesome that, Fluent Bit has multiple different outputs. Like usually we tackle this by writing the standard out. We look at the mess that we've created and we try and make some sense of it. And actually, if you look, Anurag has a very, very good video on YouTube about setting this up on the open source side of the house. I suggest you take a look at it because it's very informative. I didn't use it for this lab. I struggled through it until I found his stuff. I'm like going, I should have looked at this video earlier. But in the end, we have this configuration. And so let me go ahead and save it. And let's go ahead and start things up. Now, the next part of the process here is that we have to be able to start Fluent Bit up. So in the end here, and you can run this as a daemon process. I'm running it manual for the purpose of this activity. But if I go to bin, you'll see there's a lot of stuff in here. I don't want to say LSAL, but we see there's a Fluent Bit exe, and there's a couple other pieces of things that you use in the Windows environment. DLLs are basically the same thing as jar files when you look at a Java process. But in the end, we have the command when you install Fluent Bit, it stores it in the bin directory. Now, the other things that we have is there's a conf directory, and please tell me if this is too small to see. If you can chime in on the channel and let us know. This is too small, Kevin. I can't see it. But in the end, there are multiple different areas, but the configuration section is where we usually store the details about how we're going to work with this. Now, if I look out here, I have a bunch of different preppers, or different, configurations. And some of those are, grabbing IIS logs. Some of them are system logs. As Anurag mentioned earlier, the ability to write to S3 is also a capability, which is one of my other favorite patterns, which we'll talk about hopefully on this next webinar that we have, which is I'll do a little teaser. We're going to talk about Open Cybersecurity Framework or a schema framework and how we use that and some of the work that Anurag's team has been working on with that. But that's a little teaser here somewhere. Hopefully we can sneak this in around December. But in the end, you have the multiple destinations, and this is very helpful for routing. So let me just go back here, and pardon me, I'm having to go back between Linux and Windows, so I'm trying to remember all the commands here. But if I go into the bin-dir, and I have yes, too many CD statements. When I go in here, we can see that there is a Fluent Bit executable. So all we need to do is we need to run a command that points to our configuration. I'm going to switch over real quick to my notes and grab just a real quick thing. And I'm going to pop back into my RDP session, which is a typical protocol that you use to get into Windows boxes, unless you have some other mechanisms. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fire this off. Now, again, I have the log level debug set up on here. And I don't necessarily have to have quotes if I'm not using spaces in my files or my paths to get to the file that has my configuration. So the typical command we'd use is fluent bit -f and the name of our configuration file, which is going to, first of all, read from the WinLog security stuff. And it's going to write to OpenSearch ingestion using HTTP over 443. It's going to write to a listener endpoint, and I'll dig into that here shortly, that can intercept this and then forward this on to OpenSearch. So let's kick it off. See what happens. And sorry. Let me just make sure that I didn't put.
I think maybe the copy might have been it copied two lines. It'll be fluentbit.exe and -c.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, actually, it should be -c, right?
Correct. For configuration file.
Yeah, actually, that might be what's going on here. Let me just take the quotes out. And this is why Anurag's on the call, to keep me honest here. So now what happens now is that FluentBit establishes a connection with OpenSearch. And the thing we want to look for is these 200s. Now, 200s are good. 401s, 403s, or other errors might mean you need to dig in, which I spent a little bit of time digging into earlier because AWS IAM is a valid portion of the setup, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But what I can see now is that I have a bunch of logs being picked up. And now, if you look at the architecture of FluentBit, what happens is these system logs get emitted to a file system. You pick the information up off the file system, and it gets stored into a interim buffer, which in most cases is a memory buffer, and you have other options for different buffers. But they get stored in chunks. And what happens is as that buffer builds up and you then connect to your endpoint, if it was disconnected, it iterates through those chunks and it pushes those in a JSON format to your downstream destination, in this case, data prepper. Now you can see right now, everything's been dehydrated, and we can see that right now, we're doing a keep alive connection at the bottom of this log file to ensure that we always have a connection with OpenSearch ingestion or data prepper, or even the OpenSearch service or the OpenSearch engine, if you can configure it as such. So now we have logs flowing. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some, well, could be considered nefarious, but I'm going to put a wrong username and password. So first of all, with RDP, I come into Power and I'll disconnect. This preserves my session behind the scenes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my configuration and I'm going to grab my RDP session, and it's going to challenge me and says, okay, what's your password? Well, let's say that I was exposed publicly, and there's actually other logs that capture that. But in this case, if my other logs didn't pick it up, I need to have that final thing that says, oh, here's something that's interesting that's happening here. So I'll just type in some random password and tells me the login attempt failed. I'll try it again. All right. I can't get in. I could keep on going. I don't know if Windows has a velocity thing, and maybe you can configure that, but at a certain point in time, you may not get access. But it's a hint to people that are doing SIM or security or any sort of observability on their security environment that, guess what? There's something out there that is doing something. I don't know quite what it is, but at least there's something to back me up. So enter in OpenSearch. So first of all, when you look at OpenSearch, let's just give you a high-level view of what the security analytics tool is. So first of all, when you go into the security analytics visualization, now keep in mind that in the future, this may be a different presentation depending on the different version of OpenSearch. And right now I'm running on OpenSearch 2.11. Our latest offering on the managed service is 2.15. And the open source offering is getting ready for, I believe, 2.18. Just keep in mind that the OpenSearch service actually only deploys odd number releases. I don't know why, but odd numbers seem to stick in people's heads, and it's a scientific study in there actually. So we use odd numbers because people gravitate toward it. It's like even numbers sometimes it's like, I divided 2 by 4, but oh, hold on a second. 1 into 3, 1 into 7, or 3 into 7. I have to think about that, and actually your mind mentally focuses on. But segue. What we have then is what we call findings. Now, what findings are things that tell me things are going on here. So first of all, we have these Windows security logs that I configured earlier, and I'll go into the OpenSearch ingestion configuration, but first I want to paint this whole picture. And I can dig in and see that over the period of time, I see that there is a Windows login failure. Now, how did I determine this? If I dig into the details here, and hold on, I just got to move these screens around. What we have is a configuration and a finding ID. Now, the finding ID is built off of some detection rules. And I have the ability to actually go and look at the surrounding documents that happened over time in my OpenSearch dashboards. And this is a nice thing about the plugin. It will actually take this context and show you other log events that happened based on that finding. And so this, in the end, when you're trying to find issues, the last thing you want to do is swim through 50 million log entries, especially if you have a big deployment. And 50 million is a little bit big, but let's say thousands or tens of thousands. The human mind can process a lot, but it can't process a lot of verbosity. And so the intent on that particular part of the plugin is to basically have a surround, events that happened before and events that happened after. Now, if we go back to the other details in here, we can see that the document that kicked off the issues was the event ID 4625, which is a failure audit event. Now, we have Fluent Bit capturing this information, but something has to pick up. And what is that? So we have these what are called detectors, and it might be on this link here. It is on certain other ones, but or different versions. But if I go in and I look at my Security Analytics plugin, and let me close this down, we can see that I have a section here called detectors, and I'll run through the other different details here. But what we have are what are called detection rules. And inside of these detection rules, there are multiple things that I can pull in based on the log type. So if I want to look at Windows log types, which is what this one is, I can just basically select Microsoft Windows for system activity. Now, in this case, though, these are what we call Sigma rules. And Sigma rules themselves, if I look at the YAML, and if you go to the sigma.hqi website, you'll see that there is a predefined protocol or a pattern that you use to describe these events. Now, Praveen, my partner in crime, who joined AWS here probably about a year ago, when he first joined, I challenged him to take this and build some demos, and this is why I'm building off. So I didn't do all this demo myself. I did have a little help from Praveen. But the idea is that you take this little configuration file, which is vendor agnostic, works across Splunk, Elasticsearch, Datadog, you name the thing. There's a whole initiative around, this, Sigma activity, and also the other things that are involved with detecting threats. So when we look at how you do a query, you're basically using a detection on a selection, and we're using a product called Windows, and we use the event ID for 4624. And all this is doing is it's going in and it's looking at a specific field called event ID. And so if we look at this, it says event ID, and it matches this event ID. Now, I can get a little bit more verbose in here. It's a selection behind the scenes of the query. It says basically using query DSL, query for these events. There's no filters on it other than the event ID, and it pulls back the details. So it's going to be in the filter context for OpenSearch. I won't go too much into that, but in the end, it's a way that we can select data really quickly. And so we take this, we build these particular Sigma rules, and we basically put them into what's called a detector. Now, if I wanted to create a new detector, effectively, I can give it a name, and then I can give it another description in here. I select my source files. In this case, this will be Windows logs. And there's a lot in here. There's some stuff we're doing with the OCSF standards, so just ignore all this. But if I look at security, so Windows security logs, I can pull up a pattern, and let me just do Windows win underscore security, and I can just do a star on this, and this will basically review all of my, apologies, I'm having typophobia right now, which is I can't type to get my stuff to show up. But you do select the indexes, which can be a wildcard pattern, and you select some detection rules. Now, if I didn't have a custom thing working here, I would just go ahead and select Microsoft Windows. And then in there, we can see that there's 1583 detection rules. Now, these are a lot. In the case of the demo that we had, we just did one, but I can actually just say, give me all the rules and detect everything. Now, you may not have certain things provided or set up, so you have the choice to disable or enable these, or disable them all, and then pick one that's going to work for you. But in the end, these rules are calling Sigma, the Sigma framework, or using Sigma framework to then build queries off of that. Once you're done with that, there are some mappings that you can do if you want to override specific fields on your particular source. You might name a field a little bit differently than what we're looking for. And we can also enable threat intelligence feeds, which looks at IP addresses if they're in your logs and say, hey, this could be a compromise or a compromised endpoint that's attacking you. Or I'm sorry, compromising you. I shouldn't use the word attack. But in the end, I can set up a schedule, run every 10 minutes or whatnot. And when I'm done, I can go in and I can say, okay, when these trigger condition meets, say this particular severity, if it's critical or whatever, I can filter that. And any tags I want to have on here, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a way that I can have a link to go to understand how to solve the issue. All that is a capability in here, and I can select a channel. Right now it goes to Praveen's email, so I can't demo that. But I can also configure a notification message, and this is using basically Mustache as the mechanism to format this into, say, an HTTP email that comes in. And then I can take a look at it, and it'll generate the message, and then I can look at what that looks like. And then if I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and I can create that detector. So in the end, now I have a detector that's running. And yeah, I didn't get the field mappings in here, but hopefully we understand the gist of it. So once you have your detector running, it's got behind the scenes, it's going to pick up these issues. And it will let you know whenever an event happens. So we saw earlier, if I go into the Discover tab here, that I kicked off 3 events. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull in the right pattern here. And over time, I should see the events that transpired. Now, my events that I triggered earlier were between 1241 and 1242. If I drill down on that, I can see that now it's not going to put the password in here, but I can see that there was a failed login from 73.143.66.172. If I go in here and say, what is my IP? What I will see is that my IP address is the exact IP address of what I found during my discovery. And we can also see that that log itself was picked up by the Security Analytics plugin, and it gave us an event that happened for which I can go ahead and look at time series. I can basically drill into that failure. I can see that over my testing, I 24 times did this event. It's a high severity. And so this is our visualization mechanism that we have in here. Down at the bottom, all the detectors that are running or not running will show up in this visualization window. So there's really no visualizations that you actually have to build for this plugin. It's taken care of for you. Now, the one final thing I'm going to note, and then we'll open up for Q&A, is that we have these correlation rules. And what correlations are the ability to say, okay, I understand that we had this one Windows event, but there might be other events across log sources. And correlation rules actually enable you to use what are called filters in OpenSearch to specify the different log types and the different conditions that should be analyzed with other detectors, and the culmination of different events popping up actually mean a correlation. So what could happen is a chain of events. Kevin went in and he set his security groups on AWS to all wide open. And then the next thing is, then all of a sudden, someone who's running a repetitive port scanner all of a sudden finds that, hey, 3389, which is RDP, is wide open. Let me go ahead and try and attack it. So realize at scale, there are many, many different nefarious or bad actors out there that are trying to hit any open endpoint or anything that's exposed so that, they can try and break into your system. So in the end, and I know I didn't get a chance to cover the open search ingestion portion of it, but it's a pass through. In the end, using Fluent Bit to talk to a data prepper to facilitate and forward that to OpenSearch gives us the ability to use the security analytics plugin and create these observations, which, essentially show me that I have something that I need to address.
Awesome. And what I love about that side too is that when you're doing the demo, like that source network connection, we could extract it, maybe write a regex filter in Fluentbit or a data prepper extractor, and then run that through a threat intel feed, right? So there's a ton of downstream things that could be there.